Welcome everyone to DerekJ Speaks. It is Tuesday, February 15th, and in a week where we found out that the WWE has made overtures to Stone Cold Steve Austin about potentially returning for a match at this year's WrestleMania, and we also discovered that 205 Live is no more. As if there could not be enough big news already 2 days into this week, we also had a huge bombshell in the wrestling industry dropped on us just earlier this morning, and that is the fact that Cody Rhodes, one of the founding fathers of AEW, All Elite Wrestling, has left the company. Now, we have known for a while now that his contract expired with AEW either towards the end of 2021, sometime in December or early January, and he's been working on a handshake deal with Tony Khan. But the last time we saw Cody in an AEW ring on television was a few weeks ago in that match of the year caliber ladder match with Sammy Guevara for the TNT Championship. It's been a few weeks. He has not been seen, and now we come to find out he's gone from the entire company. This is not news that I personally saw coming, as I'm sure many of you also did not, judging by the reactions that I saw practically all morning and all throughout the day, to be honest with you. And I give them credit. It is not every day where we get news like this that drops. We get shocking news here and there, but something like this, where this is a bomb and it is something that can have huge ramifications going forward, not just on AEW, but other wrestling promotions, particularly WWE. So, a big thing that popped off today, and it was initially reported by Sean Ross Sapp, of course, as many things are nowadays. It was earlier this morning, around 10 a.m., a little bit before 10 a.m., Sean Ross Sapp tweeted this out. He said, "Word inside the wrestling world is that Cody Rhodes could be leaving AEW and joining WWE. Regardless of his intent, we're told to expect an announcement soon." And shocker, just a few minutes later, there came an official announcement from AEW, an official statement from Tony Khan, and of course a statement from Cody Rhodes. The Cody Rhodes statement was very nice, very filling. He thanked a lot of people. He was filled with a great deal of gratitude, as was Tony Khan's statement as well. Tony Khan's statement was a little bit shorter than Cody's, and this was the one that was tweeted out by the AEW official Twitter page, and it reads as follows: "Cody and Brandi Rhodes were integral to the launch of All Elite Wrestling." That's right, Brandi Rhodes is also gone. It is not just Cody Rhodes who has departed AEW, but they also lost Brandi Rhodes. So it is a package deal that the two of them are no longer with the company. But Tony Khan's statement continues: "Cody's ability, combined with his boldness and his passion for our industry and his love for community outreach, helped AEW deliver on our mission to give fans what they needed for far too long, something new, innovative, and lasting. Brandi helped us shape the AEW story, and I appreciate how hard she fought for us both in the ring and out of the ring, competing in the women's division while advancing our efforts at inclusion and civic causes, including great partnerships with Culture City and the American Heart Association. I have immense respect and appreciation for Cody and Brandy, and I wish them both the best as they move on from AEW. Thank you, Cody and Brandy. Cody got future endeavored, basically. But not necessarily, not really. His contract was up, and he didn't renew, so he left. Now, the question is, what happened? How did negotiations between both sides, between Cody and I guess Brandy as well, and Tony Khan, that led to this outcome that I know for a fact practically no one saw coming? Maybe some people thought of it when the initial report came out that Cody is on a handshake deal and he hasn't signed a new contract. I think there were a few people who thought, oh, well, he'll appear in the Royal Rumble, he'll leave, and he'll go back to WWE. But I don't think anyone seriously, genuinely thought that that would be a possibility. I think many people looked at Cody Rhodes. He practically created AEW. He was one of the founding members of the company, along with the Young Bucks and even Kenny Omega, who all joined together, and with Tony Khan as the president and, backing with his financial stability, they all came together and made this happen. So there was no serious thought that Cody would ever really leave AEW. Maybe take a step back, maybe take a little break, but not outright leave the company. So we have since heard many different rumors, many different speculations going on all throughout the day, many reports, all of them kind of mimicking each other and copying off of each other and feeding from each other's reports. But the basic gist of it, from what I can tell, is Cody Rhodes and Tony Khan were engaged in a back and forth negotiation for the last few months. And Cody, I guess, as one could probably surmise, he wanted a bigger deal. He wanted a bigger money deal, money contract, whatever it is. And for whatever Cody was looking for, I guess there just was not an agreeable term between himself and Tony Khan. There were also other reports that there may have been a fallout between Cody and Tony Khan at some point in recent times, and that also played a part in this decision. I don't know how credible that is. I'll be honest, I haven't seen too much else come from this. As of this recording, it is much, much later in the day than when all of these reports were coming out rapid fire earlier this morning. So it kind of slowed down as the afternoon and evening went along. So nothing really brand new has come out, but I'm sure this is not the end of this. This is not the last we'll hear. In the next few coming days, weeks, even months, I'm sure we'll get even more news about what the next steps are for Cody. More news on what led to this decision. I'm sure we'll get that Shoot podcast somewhere down the line with whoever it is. But whatever the reason was, Cody and Tony Khan could not reach an agreement on his contract and his place in the company. So Cody, along with his wife, Brandy Rhodes, decided to leave. It is understandable that Cody would probably want more money. He and Brandy just had a baby together not that long ago. So he's a brand new father. They, I am sure, have much more other outside interests and ventures that they are looking into as far as non-wrestling is concerned. And I'm sure Cody would want a little more financial stability in his life. And for whatever he was looking for, he was not finding it with whatever Tony Khan and AEW was offering him. And so he has made the decision to leave. And to just focus on that for a little bit, that is pretty shocking. As I've mentioned a few times already, Cody Rhodes is practically the father of AEW. He, along with the Young Bucks, brought this to life. Kenny Omega, who was not really a part of it from the very beginning because he was still under contract with New Japan, But that was simply a formality. We knew that Kenny Omega was also going to be attached to this. We knew he was going to come in as soon as he was available to do so. And once he joined in. All four men, Cody, Matt and Nick Jackson, Kenny Omega, all of them came in. They came together to form AEW, came in as EVPs, titles of which that were eventually taken away by Tony Khan for whatever reason, but they came into this to get together. And this story goes well beyond the inception of AEW. This goes all the way back to 2017 when Dave Meltzer was tweeting, or he was responding to someone who tweeted out whether or not ROH or any independent wrestling company could ever sell out a 10,000 seat arena. And Dave Meltzer's thoughts on that was not likely. And Cody Rhodes replied to that, saying that he'd take that bet and give him about a year or however many months, and he could put on that event. And he and the Young Bucks put on All Out, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, independent wrestling shows of the modern era. That was Labor Day weekend in Chicago back in 2018. And with a little bit of assistance and help from New Japan, less so New Japan and more so ROH, I would say, Ring of Honor, they put on that show. And top to bottom, that was a great show, but that was the first step towards AEW becoming what it is. I know Tony Khan has gone on record saying what motivated him and what the first step was for him was seeing the Chris Jericho Kenny Omega match at Wrestle Kingdom earlier that same year. But you can really point to All Out as being that was the first unofficial AEW event. And then fast forward a few months later into early 2019, and we discovered that All Elite Wrestling was born. And of course, Cody Rhodes was one of the main focal figureheads leading the charge, along with the Young Bucks and eventually Kenny Omega. And of course, Brandy Rhodes, her contribution is there too. She was the chief branding officer for the company. And you can say whatever you want about her character on television and anything that you have as far as your thoughts are regarding that about her as an on-screen personality. But I mean, based on what Tony Khan has said and based on other thoughts, I'm sure Brandy Rhodes was a huge contribution behind the scenes in her role. Of course, we know how Tony Khan is about saying one thing as someone is leaving and then almost backtracking a few months later. We saw that with the Big Swole situation. So I wonder if we might get a similar situation if you get Tony Khan in a bit of a pissy mood a little bit later on, if he might reveal a little bit more about his true feelings. But nevertheless, Cody Rhodes, this is mainly about him. No disrespect to Brandy, all the respect to her, but this is more focused and more central on Cody Rhodes himself, who was a big player in AEW. For a long time there in the early days, Cody Rhodes was the biggest star in AEW, outside of course, Chris Jericho, but Cody was the guy for AEW. From their very first event, Double or Nothing, in Las Vegas in 2019, that match with him and Dustin Rhodes, his brother, which that was one of the earliest matches in AEW, and all these years later, it is still one of the best matches this company ever put on. The story and the drama of that match has been almost unmatched by almost every other match that has come since it. So that was one of the early signs that this was going to be something unique, and that Cody Rhodes himself would be something that he was not fully up to that point, which is a big main event star. He was never that in WWE, and even on the independent scene when he was traveling around between New Japan and ROH, he was kind of that in ROH, but at that point Ring of Honor really was not on that big of a level, so you really could not look at him as his top main event guy. But for whatever it matters, he was that for Ring of Honor. But in AEW, new company, he's one of the EVPs, he's one of the big executives in the company, and he's one of the biggest faces who was putting himself out there for the company. And right from the jump, he was one of the biggest stars there. And he went on to have a very strong presence on the roster and created a lot of great, memorable moments and matches. He was in the first ever match on an episode of Dynamite, on that premiere episode of Dynamite in October of 2019. He wrestled Sammy Guevara. I remember that being a very good match. And it was just about a month later that he went on to challenge Chris Jericho for the AEW World Championship. He lost due to MJF's interference. And with that stipulation, the stipulation going into the match was that if Cody were to lose, he would no longer ever attempt to challenge for the AEW World Championship. A stipulation that he held up to. He owned that, and not once did we ever see him attempt to go after that championship ever again in these last few years. There was never a mention of it. There was never a tease of it. He was set in that role. I think many people thought maybe down the line they might come back to that, but I guess that's not going to happen now, is it? So without challenging for the championship, obviously Cody Rhodes needed something to do, and he went on to have a bunch of other strong feuds. He, of course, feuded with MJF for a little bit. He was the first ever TNT champion. Once that championship was created, it was practically made for Cody Rhodes. He won that championship from Lance Archer at Double or Nothing in 2020. And he went on to have a little bit of a run with the championship, had the open challenge every week. He faced many people who have become solid names, even big names to a certain degree in AEW. People like Ricky Starks, even Eddie Kingston. That was the first time we saw Eddie Kingston in AEW. So he had a nice run with the TNT Championship, a run, of course, that came to a screeching halt at the hands of Brody Lee. That was one of the most dominant victories and one of the most shocking moments in AEW history. The complete squash of Cody Rhodes at the hands of Brody Lee on that fateful night of Dynamite, that special Saturday night Dynamite in August of 2020. And of course, Cody got his win back a few months later in October in a very brutal but entertaining dog collar match between Cody Rhodes and Brody Lee, which unfortunately, of course, turned out to be Brody Lee's final match. So the historical aspect of that right there is enough to leave a lasting impact. After that, Cody feuded with people. I think he had something with Team Taz for a little bit, but honestly, as we close out 2020 and then enter into 2021, we see Cody start to have these little mini feuds with different people that don't really mean a whole lot. We had a random feud for Cody when he and what was originally supposed to be Brandy Rhodes, but then she got pregnant and had to be taken off television, and in her place was Red Velvet. The two of them going up against Jade Cargill and Shaquille O'Neal. Yes, Shaq wrestled a match in AEW, and it was against Cody Rhodes. And then after that, Cody had a bunch of other random mini feuds with different people. I think he had something with Pentagon Jr. for a little bit. Of course, the infamous Anthony Ogogo feud with Cody's very polarizing promo that he cut. I'm sure you all remember that one. He feuded with a bunch of other people, but nothing really meaningful. And it was around this time, it was in 2020, of course, when he lost the championship to Brody Lee. The reason for that was so he would be secluded in the area for them to film the Go Big Show, for which Cody Rhodes was one of the judges of. And I believe they also filmed more of the Go Big Show when they were renewed for a second season. in 2021. So Cody was really in and out for a while there, and this is where the resentment of Cody Rhodes began to build up from the fans. You can never really exactly pinpoint the exact moment of when the fans turned on him, but it was a slow, gradual thing. You look at some of those early Dynamite shows and you see Cody Rhodes come out and make his entrance and cut these promos and have these matches, and the fans are going apeshit for him every single time. They're going crazy. They loved Cody, and you could see that start to wane and simmer down a bit the more time went on, and we really saw that come to fruition during the feud between Cody Rhodes and Malachi Black. Of course, Malachi Black made a big impact in his debut. One of his first big matches was against Cody Rhodes, and he beat him in very short, dominant fashion, very similar to what Brody Lee did. Eventually, they came back for the rematch, and Malachi Black won that match as well. And I don't know if that was one of the first instances where we had a large majority of the crowd booing Cody, but that night, that was the Grand Slam show in New York. Many saw it as it's just New York being a New York crowd, so there's nothing to see here. But as the weeks went on and the months went on, the crowds began to become more and more split, and even more so heavier in the booing camp. So it's not exactly like Cody Rhodes was a big fan favorite towards the end of his run in AEW, and quite frankly, he was not doing anything of great note or anything greatly entertaining towards the end of his run. He had the match with Andrade with the stupid flaming table spot that he did all in the name of getting cheers. It looked cool. Visually it looked cool, but it was just a dumb move to perform, especially when the outcome did not change. He was still getting booed. But I don't know. I wouldn't say anything that Cody has done in recent months has been awful, but I think as more new faces were coming in and more younger names were starting to establish themselves, you get people like CM Punk coming in and Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, names like that, and you see someone like Cody Rhodes, and he's just not as appealing, and the things that he was doing on television just were not quite as appealing as what people like CM Punk were doing, or what Bryan Danielson was bringing, or even Adam Cole. The story with Hangman Page started to rise back up and really come to its conclusion, and there was much more investment in all of those things as opposed to whatever Cody Rhodes was doing at the time, once the stuff with him and Malachi Black wrapped up and ran its course. And that's led us to where we are today. And like I said, a few weeks ago, the match with Sammy Guevara for the undisputed TNT Championship, that ladder match, an easy early match of the year contender. It was amazing. And if that is going down as Cody Rhodes' final AEW match, then I can't think of a better way for him to go out. So, Cody is gone from AEW. That is official. He is no longer there. There's no non-compete. I don't even know if AEW does non-competes, but even if they did, this wasn't a release. His contract was up. His contract was up months ago, and he was only appearing and performing on a handshake agreement. So for however long he and Tony Khan wanted him to appear on TV, that's what it was. And now that is officially over, and Cody is gone, meaning Cody is free to go wherever he wants. And that led to the even bigger story, which is the report. There were multiple reports and there were multiple sources, but I first saw this from Ringside News, which is that Cody Rhodes not only was leaving AEW, but he was leaving AEW for WWE. And he was planning on making a return to the WWE. Now, we heard from other reports. Ringside News included this in their report, and other sources included it in their reports as well, that Cody Rhodes and, I guess, members of WWE, people within that camp, not right at the top, I'm sure, but maybe smaller people who speak for higher ups. There have been discussions from both parties, from both sides, in recent months, recent weeks. There have been discussions, there have been back and forth about what kind of deal can potentially be made. And apparently WWE were well aware that the Cody announcement was going to be made this morning by AEW. Some reports even indicated that they knew the exact time that it was going to be reported. So they had their fingers on the pulse, and they were well aware of the situation that was going on with Cody Rhodes and AEW. And so up to this point, this was all speculation and news. But then we get a tweet from WrestleVotes around 12:36 p.m. earlier today, where they revealed that they spoke to a source who fully anticipates that an agreement will be reached between Cody Rhodes and WWE. So WrestleVotes is a very reliable source. Ringside News, Sean Ross Sapp, all of these reports that I've been reading, they are from news sites that are very credible. They have been right, they have been wrong about things in the past, but they have also been right about many, many things. So you have to think that there is a lot of truth to this. And even if it's not entirely true, there's a good chance that whoever this source is, they may be under the impression that WWE has Cody. Maybe WWE is under that impression that they got him. That now that he's gone from AEW, he is a surefire lock to come home, to come crawling back to home to WWE. Now, of course, I don't think Cody Rhodes views it as that, but I'm sure there are those within WWE who do view things to be of that situation. And now this thought of Cody going back to WWE has caused great divide among fans. Shocker, I know. Just yet another thing to annoy people and to get under the skin of the E-drones and the AEW fans and the WWE fans who are already at a war with each other. Why? I don't know. But it's just something to further add fuel to that fire. Those who look at it from a positive perspective and those who look at it from a negative one. Now, it's not as if Cody going back to WWE is completely out of the realm of possibility. Cody spent 10 years in WWE. He was signed, he was in developmental in 2006, he got called up in 2007, he teamed up with Hardcore Holly, they eventually won the tag team titles together. Eventually, later on down the road, Cody Rhodes would be recruited by Randy Orton along with Ted DiBiase to form the Legacy faction. And within that faction, we saw Cody Rhodes get some pretty high-level TV time and feuds. Of course, majority of them were regarding whatever Randy Orton was involved with, but Cody Rhodes got to mix it up with the likes of John Cena and Batista and Triple H and even Vince and Shane McMahon for a little bit. Legacy, just Rhodes and DiBiase, had a feud with DX, Shawn Michaels and Triple H, even got a clean victory over them on a pay-per-view. So things were looking up for them, but of course, eventually Legacy dissolved, and the biggest star to come out of Legacy was Randy Orton, and Cody and Ted DiBiase were basically pushed to the wayside. No real direction, nothing really for them to do. Cody developed the dashing Cody Rhodes gimmick that lasted for a few months. Eventually, he got his nose broken. I'm doing the air quotes. He got his nose broken, so he became undashing, and then that lasted for a little bit, and then eventually that stopped, and he was just Cody Rhodes. But just Cody Rhodes started to get over. He was a heel, he was the cocky heel, but he started to get over. He brought back the classic white strap Intercontinental Championship belt, which is still the best design of that championship, and I will always love and appreciate and respect Cody Rhodes for no other reason other than that. He brought that tremendous looking championship belt back. It's not his fault that it's gone. But hey, if he comes back to WWE, maybe he can convince them to bring that design back. Who knows? But Cody, he had a nice run for himself in WWE. He got to team up with several different people, the biggest, of course, being his team with his brother, Goldust. We think about that great match with he and Goldust against The Shield at Battleground in 2013, one of the best matches that year, one of the most compelling stories and drama-filled matches that was told that entire year. That team led, of course, to the creation of the Stardust character that Cody Rhodes portrayed, a character that he played for a little bit and appeared to be having fun doing, but came to a point where he was ready to stop portraying it and wanted to go back to being just Cody Rhodes. Again, just Cody Rhodes was getting over just fine before he became Stardust. It was a funny thing at first, but then it lasted for about a year and a half, and then it was his character all the way up until he left WWE, and was a big reason for why he wanted to leave WWE, which he and Brandy Rhodes did in 2016. They announced that they were going to leave, and they did. And so now, all of these years later, Cody going to Impact, going to Ring of Honor, going to New Japan, traveling all around the indie scene, eventually leading to the formation of AEW. Cody Rhodes now, today, in 2022, is a far bigger star than he was when he first started in WWE, let alone when he left. Cody Rhodes in 2022 is a far bigger star than he was in 2016 when he left WWE. Hell, he's a bigger star now than when AEW started, before AEW even started in late 2018, early 2019. He is a far bigger star now, from everything he has done in AEW to now his outside of wrestling projects like the Go Big Show. I don't know how popular that show is, but that is more awareness of him on a bigger level than just simply staying within the wrestling bubble. So Cody is a far bigger star now than he was originally when he left WWE, which is great because WWE just so happens to be in desperate need of big stars because they ain't got a whole lot. Not on the women's side, and definitely not on the men's side. Case in point, the men's Royal Rumble match earlier this year. I will never miss an opportunity to crap on that match again because it was a boring match. And a big reason why it was boring is because it was filled with a bunch of guys who are not stars, who in some cases could eventually be stars, but they aren't right now. And to see one name, one face, one after another come out and get next to no reaction, get no excitement from the crowd because no one buys them, no one looks at them with any sense of credibility or importance or legitimacy. Cody Rhodes is someone who has legitimacy. He is someone who has a level of importance. Now, will any of that mean anything if he were to come back to WWE? There's a good chance it will not. Do you think that WWE is petty enough to potentially hire him and give him a big contract and sign this huge deal, bring him in, and just completely bury the hell out of him have him lose to this guy and that guy and just make him look like a complete idiot for all the trash talking and just creating AEW in general and going to war with Vince McMahon and WWE, or crushing Triple H and NXT as badly as they did, so much so that it completely revamped the entire concept of the NXT television show. By the way, NXT Vengeance Day is currently airing as I'm recording this. That poor show. They were completely drowned out. I hope they are putting on a great show right now. I'm not watching it right now, but I hope they're putting on a great show because they were completely overshadowed and buried under all this Cody Rhodes stuff. So, good luck to them. But that's just another example of the damage that could be perceived that Cody Rhodes was, if not partially, maybe wholly responsible for. Do you think WWE is petty enough to bring him in just to punish him for all that? Are they that petty? Yes, they are. We have seen them do far worse to others. Remember Brock Lesnar, who came back in 2012, big name from the UFC, one of the biggest stars on the planet at that time. Brock Lesnar comes in, he's an ass kicker, he's a real fighter, and he comes in his first match in and he loses to John Cena. And it wasn't just because Cena lost to The Rock the month earlier or whatever reason. John Cena was the biggest star in the company at that point, so give him a win over Brock Lesnar. No. Now I'm sure maybe that's what they could claim, but I'm sure they did not forget the fact that Brock Lesnar sued them before or after, as he was leaving WWE back in 2004. I'm sure they did not forget that little fact, and I'm sure that having that in the back of their mind played a little factor in their decision to have him lose to John Cena in his very first match. But eventually they overcame that, and now you see Brock Lesnar today, one of the best parts of the entire television show right now on any WWE show, Raw, SmackDown, whatever. One of the most entertaining parts about it is Brock Lesnar. So, it's not all doom and gloom for Cody Rhodes if he comes back. There is also a very strong possibility, now hear me out, that they could potentially bring in Cody Rhodes and treat him like a star. Because he is one. And they need them. Cody Rhodes is, at least a star of that caliber, is much needed on Raw and SmackDown. Now, Cody Rhodes is not someone who's going to move any needles. He's not someone who's going to increase the ratings for Raw and SmackDown by 3 or 4 million. He's not this needle mover, but no one in WWE is a needle mover. So, he'd fit right in. But what about the concept? What about the idea of Cody Rhodes coming in before WrestleMania or after WrestleMania? What about before? Coming in any week now. Hell, Cody Rhodes is free to do whatever he wants. Maybe he'll make the trip over to Saudi Arabia and we'll see him at Elimination Chamber this Saturday. Who knows? We could see him pop up on Raw. We could see him pop up on SmackDown any week now. There's a good chance you might hear fans chanting Cody Rhodes' name on TV going forward, with the idea that he could potentially show up at any point to set up a big WrestleMania match. I saw some people floating around the idea of Cody Rhodes versus Triple H at WrestleMania. To that I say, slow your roll. The possibility of Triple H wrestling ever again is very slim, let alone wrestling a match in about a month and a half against Cody Rhodes. So, let's pump the brakes on that fantasy booking there. But, is there a big match for Cody Rhodes to happen at WrestleMania? Potentially. I don't have the roster in front of me to look and see any names, but I'm sure that could be a possibility. You could hold him until after WrestleMania. There's probably a thought that the buzz is high on Cody Rhodes right now to make a deal, finalize that deal, and bring him in as soon as possible. You know, timing is of the essence. So waiting several months, waiting until after April to bring him in, could the bloom be off the rose by then? I don't think so. I think Cody Rhodes is a big name right now, and he is very widely popular, and his name is trending still to this very minute, and I'm sure this will be big news that will continue all throughout the week, all throughout the month, and into next month. This story will just keep growing and building until he eventually makes his decision on where he's going to go. And then I'm sure that will have a domino effect and have equally, if not even bigger, ramifications attached to it. Bigger than just simply him leaving AEW. So the way I look at it, on the surface level, do I see Cody Rhodes going back to WWE as being a good thing? Not necessarily, only because I look at the WWE product. I look at their handling of certain talent that they have now, and I do not feel as comfortable with the idea of them bringing someone like Cody Rhodes back into the fold and thinking that they'll do much better with him. Even if they do, they could give him a nice big push, all the fanfare, bells and whistles for the first few weeks, first few months of his return. And then by the end of the year, he's just another guy on the roster, just like everyone else. There's nothing special about him. There's nothing that stands out about him. He's just another guy. He'll get big reactions. He'll get pretty good, decent reactions, but he's not really doing much. He's floating around, very similar to what he started to do in AEW, believe it or not. So it's very possible he could come in and not really do much. You also look at another aspect of this story. Cody Rhodes leaving AEW, potentially coming to WWE. Could Cody Rhodes not be the last name that we hear do that? Could there be other names currently in AEW who could see all of this unfold with Cody Rhodes and they see him make that jump over to WWE, going back to WWE, and with him having great success? Could there be other names on the AEW roster right now who look at that and are looking at this entire situation and wondering what a situation would look like for them if they were in a similar boat? In Cody's statement, he mentioned some of his kiddos that he liked to thank. Names like MJF appeared. Names like Jade Cargill appeared. And I'm sure there were others. Cody has very close friends in AEW. People like Ricky Starks. People like QT Marshall. Not that QT Marshall will be a hot commodity for WWE. He's not even a hot commodity for AEW. But there is a level of training and wisdom that comes with him running the Nightmare Factory for Cody Rhodes. Could something like that be brought over to WWE? MJF likes to talk about every now and then the bidding war of 2024. If he can look from afar and see Cody Rhodes gaining all this success by leaving AEW and going back to WWE and being treated with this much respect and being treated in such high regard, because someone like MJF look at that and think the decision may not be so crystal clear for me in 2024. I might hear out both sides. I might hear a little closer to the WWE side than I originally thought I was going to be. Like I said, this is not simply just one wrestler leaving a company. This is one of the biggest stars of that company, one of the founding fathers of that company leaving that company and going back to the company that originally birthed him, where they did not leave on exactly the best of terms, and their relationship since then has been somewhat tumultuous. So to see him go back to that could be very fascinating to see unfold. What about the possibility that WWE ain't even an option, and that strictly is a rumor? What if Cody Rhodes is going to take a page out of the handbook of John Cena and The Rock and Batista and try to venture into Hollywood? He's on a TV show right now. He's not really acting on that show, but maybe he takes with him some of that experience he had in his guest spots on Arrow with Stephen Amell, and he might get the Hollywood acting bug. What if he wants to go into politics? What if he wants to do something else? What if he wants to just take a break from all of it? That's the least likely option, in my opinion. I don't think that, although it could be a possibility. Again, he and Brandy just had a baby. They just had a beautiful baby girl born. So maybe he wants to spend more time with her. Maybe that's the mindset of him and Brandy Rhodes right now. Or maybe WWE could come calling and Cody Rhodes picks up that phone and answers the call. Who knows? Maybe Brandy Rhodes might come with him. They appear to be a package deal right now. So there's a possibility that where Cody goes, Brandy might follow. And would that be in a wrestling capacity? Who knows? I just thought it would be fun to come on here and talk about all of this because this took up a lot of my attention for the early part of my morning and a good chunk of the day off and on. Because news like this does not just break every single day. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but again, maybe I'm not. I'd like to think I'm not. In fact, I don't think that. I know I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is huge news. And this is news. This is a situation worth following and worth paying close attention to. Every last detail, every story that comes out. Now, be careful with the news sites and the reports that you look into and that you read from. Trust more of the credible ones. I mentioned them earlier. The Sean Ross Sapps of the world. Dave Meltzer. I know his name is like he who must not be named among many circles of wrestling fans, but he has a lot of credibility to him. Wade Keller, Brian Alvarez. Look at Twitter pages like WrestleVotes or Ringside News and all these other different news sites. I'm sure there's others that are not immediately coming to my mind who can be trusted. So just be careful when you're looking around and you're listening to people's thoughts and you're looking at opinions and speculation. At the end of the day, a lot of it is truly speculation because the only people who know for absolute sure what is going to happen with Cody Rhodes and Brandy Rhodes are Cody Rhodes and Brandy Rhodes. Everything outside of that is pure speculation. Do I think we will have an immediate answer this very week? It's possible, but I also don't think that's going to happen. I think this might drag on a little bit. But you never know. Like I said, pay attention to Elimination Chamber this weekend. We could see Cody Rhodes pop up in Saudi Arabia. You never know. But this is a huge story, and it is definitely something to follow. So, just pay attention, keep your eyes open, and look out because we could be in for some very interesting developments going on in the year 2022. This was not on my Wrestling 2022 bingo card. So, I did not see this coming. I know many of you also did not, and I can imagine the next moves that we will see from Cody, from Brandy, and maybe other names that will follow. It'll also be quite shocking. So, that's it for me here. That's enough of me talking about this. I'm sure if something big happens later on this week, maybe I'll be right back here talking to you guys about it. Other than that, next time you will hear me on this channel will be this Saturday afternoon, recapping the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view. So if you like what you